Hi, folks. Welcome to Why New Mexico is the Wrong Search State. This is going to be the topic for my show this afternoon. And I was thinking about this after watching the AGK show about elephants and ants. And Shelley made a very impassioned argument for why New Mexico is the correct search state. And for people who are searching in New Mexico, don't take this the wrong way. This is more of just a thought exercise and a counterpoint to why I don't think the chest is there. So there's obviously good arguments for it being there. If it was found in New Mexico, would not surprise me at all. But I don't search in New Mexico. I love the state. I visited all over there, but I don't search there because I don't think it's the correct state. And so I'm going to break down a couple of the arguments that are used by New Mexico searchers for why they think it's most relevant, and we can talk about those for a little bit. And then I'll also introduce some arguments, some things that Forrest has said, particularly relating to his original concept for the hunt, which was to die at his special location. So the first two arguments that are used to sort of support the New Mexico theory most strongly are, number one, it just being close to where he lives. And the idea behind this is that we know that the final spot that Forrest picked was also supposed to be the place where he would die because he thought that he had terminal cancer. And so the basis of this argument is he wouldn't pick a spot that's too far away, something that he would have to drive hundreds of miles perhaps to get to, because maybe his health wouldn't be good enough, maybe he wouldn't have the ability to get to a distant location. So trigger warning a little bit, we're going to talk about death and suicide and things like that that are part of the Forrest Fenn origin story, so to speak. So if that's too dark for you, you might want to tune out for the next 5 or 10 minutes until I get past that stage of the argument. So assuming that, that Forrest Fenn wanted to die in this particular spot, we have to assume that he also planned it out pretty thoroughly. And we have the example of his father's suicide I think it first appeared in a scrapbook and then is in, or maybe it was in The Thrill of the Chase first, I don't remember which. But in any case, his father wanted to cheat death and die on his own terms. And so instead of slowly fading away in a hospital, he took a handful of sleeping pills and sort of did it his own way, so to speak. And I think Forrest wanted to copy that example or he liked that idea. And he phrases that way in The Thrill of the Chase, where he goes, nobody wants to be, hooked up to tubes for months in a hospital bed. He wants to be out in the woods where that is his comfortable place. So to go into that argument deeper, the idea would be that Forrest had, we got a comment already. I do have one watcher, yay! This is mostly just to get it off my chest. This is my format for just discussing ideas that I don't have anybody else to talk to about. So what was I going back to? Okay, so New Mexico, the main argument there is that it's close to his home. If he needed to get to it quickly, he would be able to do so. I would counter that with Forrest was planning to essentially commit suicide. And it's a kind of disturbing idea, but that's how he wanted to go out and sort of follow in his father's example versus slowly dying of cancer. And when you do that, it gives you a little bit more options because you can pick your time and place. So I don't see that as being a limitation to distance, because you wouldn't necessarily be, you're picking the actual time that you die. You're not necessarily waiting to die naturally. And so getting out to Wyoming or Montana or one of the places that I think he has a stronger connection to is very realistic when you're planning to essentially kill yourself. So the second argument that people use is, or that New Mexico searchers use, it's really strong, is they take the literal wording in the Thrill of the Chase book. Okay, and by the way, we're done talking about death and suicide now, so now we can get on to some lighter subjects. The original Thrill of the Chase book uses the phrase "in the mountains north of Santa Fe." And the argument that's made is that the original chase boundaries, so to speak, like the area that Forrest had designated of the chase taking place, was in very close proximity to Santa Fe and to the areas that he was familiar with near where he lived and worked for decades. Here's the best argument against that. If Forrest's original intention was to only or was to primarily have the chase be centered around his home place and his home state of New Mexico, why did he set the perimeters to a vague distance only north of Santa Fe? So the more logical way to do this, if you wanted to originally set the perimeters to New Mexico, would say in the mountains of New Mexico. There's national forest to the east, to the west. I've been in the southwest portion of the state before. There's mountains and forests down there. Not part of the Rocky Mountains, but he could have set the boundaries to being just within the state of New Mexico if he didn't plan on expanding those search boundaries later. So here's my theory. Forrest says, the statement that we've heard before and talked about is, it's not who you are, it's who they think you are. We know that Forrest had a natural knack for marketing and persuasion, and he either learned this well learning the art business or had some natural ability that was developed over his years running the gallery. So, and this also parallels to fly fishing. I don't know much about fly fishing, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on that. But from what I understand, there's a lot of using the right bait for the type of fish, for the time of year, and what they're wanting to eat. It's a mesh up of trying to attract what you want by creating the fly that the fish are going to bite. And I think Forrest knew a lot about human psychology at the time and what would attract people. He gives an example of this in how he advertised his gallery. He said that he used full page color ads, because the perception is if nobody knows anything about your art gallery, they're judging you on appearances. So if you see two ads in a paper and one of them is just a little black and white square and the other is this gorgeous full color ad, your perception, regardless of what the gallery's selling or the competence of its proprietors, anything like that, what you're creating an image that people are responding to and judging based on that. And you do this every single day when you pass a business and you see a sign and maybe one of the lights out, you think, oh, this isn't as professional a place. Or you see a website that's kind of crummy. Maybe that business is actually really good at what they do. They just didn't spend a lot of money on creating a website, but people still judge the appearances of that. And Forrest understood that. And so he spent the money to make his business look more credible in order to establish it as a more high-end gallery right away. So I think he did something similar in the chase. He knew that he was going to get criticized for maybe this is a money-making venture, and that happened anyways. People have commented on the books and how, oh, maybe he's just selling books and this is his way of doing a marketing scam sort of thing. So he had contingency plans in place to remove that appearance of this just being a ploy to sell books. But additionally, he had to make the hunt grow naturally. So in the original Thrill of the Chase, he started with a boundary that was not very fixed. It just says mountains north of Santa Fe. And I think he knew ahead of time that he was going to expand that boundary as the chase grew. He needed to start the seed in New Mexico. That's where the searchers, probably the majority of searchers, I wasn't around for that part of the search season, but I would imagine the majority of the searchers in the early years, essentially 2010, 11, 12, were probably mostly searching in New Mexico. And there were people also up in the Yellowstone and greater Yellowstone area. But in any case, he set the parameters in a way that he could later clarify and expand the search territory as the search grew. And this is where I think Forrest fibbed a little in his origin story, because we've seen early interviews from him where he talked about, I didn't expect the chase to get so big. And I think he did anticipate the possibility of the chase getting big, and he was going to, if it did, he was going to expand the territory outside of that once it had grown past a certain stage. This is the same sort of principle that's done with viral videos. There's companies now who will help you make a video go viral. And what they do is they seed it. You have to get it in front of the right people at the right time to sort of spark this organic growth. And Forrest's strategy for creating a viral treasure hunt was to initially seed it in New Mexico. He runs the 1,000 copies of the book. He sometimes I talk so fast I just lose my train of thought. He runs 1,000 copies of the book. His original search boundary sort of hints or alludes that it's near New Mexico, but he didn't set a upward boundary on that north figure. And I think that's important, because I think if he only intended it to be in New Mexico entirely, he wouldn't have said mountains north of Santa Fe. He would have said in the mountains of New Mexico. And I think that's evidence that he intended to expand that search boundary out later on as the chase grew naturally through its own means. So that's my idea for that. I think the people know I'm searching in Montana. I think the intention, once the chase was actually launched, there was no longer a goal of dying with the chest or going there to die. I think that it morphed away after the cancer scare, and he knew that he had more time here. And so once he actually hid the chest and publicized it that way, he hasn't ruled out the possibility of still going to there as a final resting place, so to speak. But I don't think that's part of his original intention anymore. And I don't think that is a consideration, because I said I wasn't going to talk about death anymore, but we'll delve there again for a second. When you die naturally, you don't have as much control over the timing of it. When he thought he had a very limited amount of time with cancer, I think he knew that he would be in more control of the time of it. And it made sense for him to travel further away from New Mexico because he had the advantage of being able to control that. But now that the chase is really more about the chest and not about Forrest's final resting place, I don't think that's part of his consideration anymore. Anybody have any questions on that or other ideas? That's all I had to say. I was mostly following up after, as I said at the beginning, AGK's video about elephants and ants, because they use that to sort of limit the search area back to New Mexico. I'll delve into that just slightly more and tie it into the, get back in the box idea. I think a lot of these metaphors that Forrest uses, telling us to get back in the box, to simplify, to, people are focusing on the ants instead of the elephants. I think these are ideas to go back to literal meanings of things. And I've coined the phrase, I'm a poem literalist. Instead of conjuring up these crazy fanciful solves that use tons of layers of metaphors and complicated ideas, probably some of the early ideas were the right ideas. We know people got close early on within the first few years of the chase. And I think people have kind of excluded some of those ideas now, thinking, oh, that area has been searched really heavily, or people have already talked about that, so it's clearly wrong. Nothing's ruled out yet. We really can't, eliminate anything that Forrest has not specifically eliminated, such as, the states of Idaho and Utah and things like that. And also going back to looking at the poem with fresh eyes for the first time. I think most people who've been in the chase any length of time have probably showed the poem to somebody else who hasn't seen it. And something I'll reiterate again, people, what is the first thing that people notice when they're reading the poem for the first time? What clue jumps out more than any other? There's really two that jump out, but what phrases in the poem do people sort of lock in on when they first read it? I've showed the poem to probably, I don't know, a dozen people who have never read it before and gathered different opinions on it. The phrases that people commonly point out to me is Homa Brown and the Blaze. This is what people latch on to, thinking that there's a shortcut to jump ahead and solve those and complete the solve, which we know isn't possible to do. But I feel like that could tie back into the elephant and the ant thing. Going back to what you first notice, even though maybe you can't solve Homa Brown before you solve Where Warm Waters Halt, it's one of the ingredients making up the correct solution to the puzzle. So it might be important to solving Where Warm Waters Halt, for example. I don't know. That's just my thought on that. See if there's any comments to go on. Otherwise, I will sign off until I've got something else I can ramble on for 10 minutes. Davio likes Montana too. I like Montana. I like Wyoming. My solve also crosses into Wyoming in one variation of it. I would say Montana and Wyoming are the most likely states, in my opinion. And I still want to do a video on why. I think there's a lot that's pointing that way, especially this year with the 6 questions that came out on, what was that, February 4th, I think. The umbilically connected line, I think, was just such a direct hint pointing to the Montana, Wyoming, Greater Yellowstone area, because that's where you really, that's something that Forrest was connected to from his childhood, which is what that conjures up in your imagination. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I will pop back on here with a new topic maybe as soon as tomorrow. I've got a few other ideas.